Okay, for our 10.2 notes, Simplifying Radical Expressions Day 2, we have a couple of review questions to start with from way back when about our slope, x-intercepts, and y-intercepts. So on number 1, it tells us that to find an equation of a line that has a slope of -3 and contains the point 1, -5. Well, remember, a line's equation is y equals mx plus b. All right, and we only know how to solve for one variable at a time, so we must be able to find at least 3 of these. Well, we have our slope. Our slope is our m. And we have a coordinate point here, so this is our x and our y. So I'm going to plug in all those values, see what we get for b. So I replace y with -5. I replace m with -3. I replace x with 1, and we are solving for b. So if I'm going to solve this, the first thing I would need to do is multiply these two terms here together. So I have -3 times 1, which is -3, plus b. All right, now I need to get the b by itself. In order to do that, I'm going to need to move this 3 over here. If it's negative, to move it, I have to add it. So those go away. -5 plus 3 gives me -2. So my value for b is -2. So if I was to write an equation, I would have y equals my slope, x, and then my b, which we found to be -2. All right, it also says, what is the x and y intercept of this equation? So there's a couple ways we could do that. We could get it into y equals mx plus b form, solve for b, and then plug in everything we know at once we have found b, which would be our y-intercept, to find the x-intercept. Or you could take the x and set it equal to this side to find your x-intercept, and this piece equal to 18 to find your y-intercept, which probably would go a little bit quicker. So I'm going to take my 3x and set it equal to the other side. And I will divide by 3 to get x by itself. So I end up with x equals 6, which tells me that our x-intercept, or where we cross the x-axis, is at the point 6, 0. All right, now I'm going to do the same thing, but with the y to find my y-intercept. So I'll have -2y equals 18. To get y by itself, I divide by -2. We end up with y equals -9. Therefore, my y-intercept is at the coordinate point 0, -9. So here are our two values. All right. So then we have a few examples asking us to simplify. Our first example doesn't have any variables, so we're just worried about the number here. So what multiplies to give us 648? We probably don't know too many possible numbers there, but we do know that it's even, so we could definitely use 2. 2 and 324 would multiply to give us 648. All right, then I'm going to multiply again something by 2 since this is even. So I have 2 and 162. And again, 162 is even, so I can use 2 again. 2 times 81 will give me 162. All right, so now I am out of even values here. So now I'm going to have to pick something else. It is an odd number, so there's a good chance it's divisible by 3. I could check in my calculator and find that 3 times 27 would give me 81. And then 27 is something we are familiar with. We could use 3 and 9. And then for 9, we could use 3 and 3. All right, so now we just need to go back and circle our pairs. So I have a pair of 3's here. I have a pair of 3's here, and I have a pair of 2's here, and I have one leftover 2. So I'm going to take out a 2, I'm going to take out a 3, and I'm going to take out another 3, and we have a 2 left over under the square root. Now, if I'm going to take out all 3 of these numbers, I need to multiply them together. So I'll do 2 times 3, which is 6, 6 times 3, which is 18, and we have our square root of 2. All right, number 2 has both numbers and variables. So this is just like our last set of notes. So first, I'm thinking about what multiplies to give me 512. It is even, so I can use 2. 2 and 256 will give me 512. Again, that number is even, so I can split it by a 2. 2 and 128. And again, 128 is even, so I can split it by 2. 2 and 64 would give me 128. And finally, something we are familiar with, we know that 8 times 8 gives us 64. So now I just go back and circle my pairs. I have a pair of 8's and a pair of 2's, and then this leftover 2 that unfortunately I cannot pull out from underneath the square root. So I get to pull out an 8 and I get to pull out a 2. So I'm going to need to multiply those two things together when I do that. And I also have this 2 left over underneath the square root. All right, now I have to take care of my variables. So for A has an exponent of 2, which is an even number. And our rule for even numbers is just to divide by 2. And 2 divided by 2 gives us 1. So we're going to get to pull out an A to the first power. Since it was even, there's nothing left inside the square root. Now I have to do B. So B is 3, which is odd. Our rule for odds is to subtract 1. So 3 minus 1 would give us 2. And divide by 2, which would give us 1. So I get to pull out a B to the first power, but because it's odd, I also have to leave a B underneath the square root. So I need to multiply my numbers out here. I've got 8 times 2, which is 16. AB times the square root of 2B. All right. Number 3. So this one we've got numbers and variables under the square root, as well as something out here on the outside that we need to keep in mind. So let's do the numbers first. It just so happens 81 has a perfect square root. 9 times 9 gives us 81, so I'm going to get to pull that 9 out. All right, so I already had an AB out in front. I'm now going to be multiplying at least by the 9 I found here. Now we're going to take care of our variables. So A has an exponent of 6, which is even. For evens, we just divide by 2. So I'm going to get to pull out an A to the third. All right, and then for B, my exponent is also even, 8. Again, we just divide by 2. So I get to pull out a B to the fourth. Because these were both even, we have nothing left under the square root. So I'm just going to multiply all of this together. So the only number I have is 9. Remember, when you are multiplying variables, that we add their exponents. So we talked about this in the last set of notes as well. So these don't have exponents, but they're understood ones. So I have A to the first and A to the third. If I add those exponents, 1 and 3, I'm going to end up with A to the fourth. For B, we've got 1 and 4. I'm going to end up with b to the 5th. All right, for number 4, we deal with our number first. What multiplies to give us 12? We might choose 4 and 3. And what multiplies to give us 4? 2 and 2. So there's one pair, so I'm going to be able to pull that out of the square root, but that 3 does not have a pair, so it's left over. Also, we need to keep in mind there was already this 2 outside. So this 2 that was already there, and I've now decided that I'm going to pull out a 2. And then we have our leftover 3 underneath the square root. All right, so now we need to deal with our variables. So A has a power of 7, which is odd. Our rule for odds is to subtract 1, which would give us 6, and then divide by 2, which would give us 3. So I'm going to get to pull out an a to the 3rd. However, because it was odd, we also have to put 1 under the square root for our remainder. All right, now we have to do b. b has an exponent of 11, which is also odd. So we will subtract 1, which is going to give us 10, and then divide by 2, which is going to give us 5. So I get to pull out ab to the 5th, but because it was odd, we also have 1 underneath the square root. So we need to multiply our numbers here. We've got 2 times 2, which is going to give us 4. Then we have a cubed, b to the 5th, times the square root of 3ab. All right, number 5. I'm going to deal with that 72 first. So what multiplies to give us 72? We could use 9 and 8. And we know that 3 and 3 will multiply to give us 9. So there's our first pair. And for 8, we can use 4 and 2. And we can break 4 down into 2 and 2. And we have 1 left over. We need to also keep in mind we already had negative 5xy on the outside. So I have now decided that I'm going to pull out a 3 and a 2. So remember, that means I have to multiply those together as well. All right, now we're going to take care of our variables under the square root. So for x, my exponent is odd. 5 is odd. So our rule is to subtract 1 and divide by 2, which gives us 2. So I'm going to be able to pull out an x squared, but because it was odd, I'm also going to, underneath my square root, have an x as well as the 2 that didn't have a pair here. So far under our square root, we have 2x. Now we need to take care of our y. Well, my y's exponent is 4, which is even. So all we have to do for evens is divide by 2, which is going to give us 2. So I can pull out a y squared. Since it was even, there are no leftovers. So now I just need to multiply everything together down here. So numbers first, I've got negative 5 times 3, which is negative 15, and then negative 15 times 2, which is negative 30. All right, using our same rule from up here, when we multiply variables, add their exponents. So there's no exponents written here, but they're understood ones. So for x, we're going to have 1 plus 2, which is going to give us x to the 3rd. And for y, we're going to have 1 plus 2 as well, which is y to the 3rd, times the square root of 2x. All right. Last one, underneath our square root, we deal with the numbers first. The square root of 121 actually has a perfect square root of 11. So there was already this 3mn squared, and we've just decided to pull out an 11 as well. All right, now we're going to deal with our variables of our exponents. So for m, we are even. We have 4. And our rule for evens is just to divide by 2. So we're going to get to pull out an m squared, and it's even, so there's no leftovers. Then for our n is odd. Our exponent is 5. So our rule for odds is to subtract 1. 5 minus 1 is going to give us 4. And then divide by 2. 4 divided by 2 is going to give us 2. So I'm going to get to pull out an n to the second power. But because it was odd, we have to have 1 underneath the square root as well. All right, last one, we have p. P is 7, which is odd. So our rule for odds is to subtract 1. 7 minus 1 gives us 6. And divide by 2. 6 divided by 2 is going to give us 3. So I get to pull out a p cubed, but because it was odd, we also have to leave 1 remaining under the square root. So now I just need to multiply everything together. So numbers first, 3 times 11 gives us 33. And then same rule, when we're multiplying variables, add their exponents. So we'll do m first. This is an understood 1. So I have a 1 plus 2 here. It's going to give me m to the third. All right, then for n squared, we've got a 2 and a 2. If I add those, I get n to the fourth. And then we just have a p cubed times the square root of np.